Hey, Jegaysus.
Hi, friends.
Shabbat shalom, bitches.
Welcome, boys, girls, theys, gays, guys, and goys.
Yeah.
To another especially kosher episode of the Unholy Trinity on this Shabbat. We have Rabbi Chana back with us for yet another episode, and we had a plan. We did. The plan was that we would do another episode specifically on interfaith marriage, and we definitely want to have Rabbi Chana back on at some point to do that episode. However, as many of you have noticed as you've been getting updates on the news, whether you've heard it through the grapevine because you've been avoiding the news or you heard it outright, there has been a shift in the United States of America, specifically around women's reproductive rights. There's been a leak that there will be an active attempt at the overturn of Roe v. Wade in the United States, something that we have heard as a potential for a long time. Mm-hmm. Some people never thought it would happen, and yet here we are on the cusp of it. So we're going to do our best today to have a conversation, a meaningful one, around this issue, and talk about resources, talk about how this happened, do a reaction, and hopefully talk about what it would mean to organize our communities well in light of everything that we've learned from the news.
Yeah, and hopefully everyone's out there taking care of their mental health as best as possible, because I don't know about y'all. I feel a little bit better today, but that might be because I'm sitting with friends, but it's felt very frustrating and want to scream from the rooftops. So my mental health has been drained, and I don't have a uterus, so I can't imagine what some people out there are going through right now. So hopefully you're taking care of each other and you're taking care of yourself. That's just what I want to say before we go into the episode.
That's a really good point. There's a content creator on TikTok who is a community organizer who said, a lot of you want to know what to do. First thing I'd like to say is that you look tired. When's the last time you went to bed? Mm-hmm. When's the last time you drank water? You need to have a good meal. What's your favorite place in town that you could order from? Just make that happen tonight. People are going to need your energy, not your urgency. And I thought that was very helpful. What do we do with our energy when we feel urgency around issues like this? So
I will say that I am somebody who is a uterus holder and someone who has given birth, carried 6 children. I've had 9 pregnancies, one of which was an ectopic pregnancy that almost killed me. And I've seen floating around this idea that ectopic pregnancies are able to be transplanted into uteruses, and that's not a thing. Like that can't happen. You know, these things implant inside your fallopian tube, and I was bleeding out. I had to have emergency surgery. And so then we fast forward to now, and I'm hearing this kind of misinformation, as well as the misinformation that everybody's just going to go out and get an abortion at the 3rd trimester, and it makes my head explode. Those are the talking points that I'm seeing from right-wing conservative and honestly people who don't have uteruses. They're usually white men. I said it. They're old white men who will never understand what people who have uteruses go through, and they try to exclude our voices as if we don't have any kind of agency over our own body.
I've seen videos in like the Tennessee state legislator or whatever where people are debating these bills, and like you said, an old 70-year-old crotchety white man standing up there saying they're not going to make exceptions for ectopic pregnancies, for saying rape and incest along with all those things. Sure, they're going to keep those completely in the bill, but we're adding a provision for ectopic pregnancies being considered abortion. And then him being in a screaming match with like another 50-year-old state senator being like, you don't understand science. Yeah. Like, you don't understand, this will kill a woman. There's never going to be viability. And he was like, I still think that it's a baby. And they're like, it will never be a baby. You need a womb to survive. You need to go to school and like look at the science, because you're just off your chain. Mm-hmm. And those are the men who are controlling the conversation. It's terrifying.
You know, that's really interesting. I think you pointed to something there that if we look at a map of where poverty lines are, and then add on top of that the most common teen pregnancies, and then add on top of that the least educated, sex-educated school districts, all those maps line up in an eerily perfect way. When we have poor sex education, we see an increase in teen pregnancy. One of the most common causes for first-generation poverty is teen pregnancy. And then here we are. So a lot of people, here's the thing, we have listeners tonight that don't know what an ectopic pregnancy is. No, Rabbi Chana, you experienced this. I mean, I can give a definition, Jegaysus could give a definition, but you experienced the effects of it.
Yeah.
Can you explain to people, can we re-enter sex ed for a second and how important that would be for this conversation? What is an ectopic pregnancy?
Absolutely. So I experienced my first pregnancy when I was 15. I was already married. I was a child bride. That's an issue for another time. Normally what happens is sperm meets egg in the fallopian tube. They connect and then they travel down the fallopian tube, and egg, fertilized egg implants itself into your uterine wall and starts the business of making baby. In my case, and in every ectopic pregnancy case, it doesn't come down the fallopian tube. It attaches itself to the inside of the fallopian tube. Now, fallopian tube can't handle that. So as the clump of cells start to expand and get bigger, it exerts pressure onto the fallopian tube, and it can kill a person if it is not taken care of, because what will happen is the fallopian tube will rupture. And it can cause sepsis. It can cause hemorrhaging. In my case, that's exactly what happened. I thought I was having a heavy menstruation cycle, because at that time, my menstruation cycles were not regulated. I was young. I was 15. And I ended up bleeding so bad. I was laying on my bathroom floor bleeding. And my then husband rushed me to the ER only to find out that I had an ectopic pregnancy and it had ruptured, and I had to go into emergency surgery to have the egg removed and repair my fallopian tube, because I could have died, and that is not unusual. If there have been cases of people dying because they didn't know what was going on and they end up hemorrhaging and they get septic and they don't know, they think they're just having a very heavy menstruation cycle, and there is nowhere in the world where an ectopic pregnancy can be planted, because once it's detached, because they have to remove it, it's dead. It has no more, there's nothing left to replant. That doesn't happen. I know it's like idealistic, but again, like you both said, it comes from a lot of, and I'm sorry to say it, white men who think that this is what's happening. And that was my first pregnancy. My very first pregnancy almost killed me at 15. And then I had issues with pregnancies after that, just because my fallopian tube was scarred from the experience. In fact, I ended up having 2 emergency C-sections. The first one because I'm not a white person and I was allowed to labor for 72 hours without any help or intervention until I was to the point of exhaustion. And finally, a doctor said, well, I guess we'll have to give you a C-section, because they didn't listen when I kept saying, and I was almost killed during that too. So, that's another issue. The way that we look at carrying children and pregnancy and birth, women, anyone who has a uterus puts their life on the line every time they carry a child.
Yeah.
There's no BS.
Rabbi Chana, I know this is very personal, but you just touched on another thing that I think a lot of people will be very ignorant about. Why would you, being a woman of color, affect how you're treated while in labor? Could you explain that?
I want to be clear that I am not a black woman. Black women are 4 times as likely to die during labor or to die after labor as white women, because their pain is not taken seriously. When they complain about something happening, they are likely to be told everyone goes through pain during birth, or you're overreacting, or you're hysterical. Now, I knew I was trying to advocate for myself. My partner was trying to advocate for me with our son, saying there's something wrong, I'm not progressing. And they kept telling me that there was nothing wrong. And then they put the Pitocin, which is a chemical that they will put in an IV to try and help along labor, to so high that I had such painful contractions, but it wasn't progressing. So I was literally in labor, 2-minute contraction every 2 minutes my cervix was not opening. There was nothing happening. So they put in a epidural, and they put it in the wrong space. So instead of numbing from here down, from my abdomen down, it started to numb me up, and I stopped breathing. And it was my female partner at that time who literally ran out and yelled, "There is something wrong," And they didn't care but if I had been a white person, white women have less likely chance of dying during childbirth, because if they even exhibit a small amount of issue, their needs are tended to. And I've seen this in action. My ex-partner is a white person. And when they were going through labor with our children, anything they wanted, like glass of water, like if you needed your feet rubbed, somebody was there to do it. And I was like, how is this a thing? This is good. I'm glad you're having a very good birth experience. And the only women who took care of me in terms of nurses were women who looked like me. They were all Latino women or Black women nurses who understood what I was going through, and they were the ones who advocated for me. The white women told me, you're just over-exaggerating. And I'm like, this is my 5th child. I know what feels wrong and what doesn't in labor.
Medical racism is so terrifying because,
yes.
People's lives are on the line, and we're letting these biases come in. And it starts in medical school. It's honestly like something that's trained for. Yeah. There
are still textbooks that say that Jewish people want their pain to be shared and need to complain about it. That the same textbooks will say that Black people over-exaggerate their pain so that they can get medication. I've seen these textbooks.
And that it takes less medication to sedate a Black person because they have a different metabolism, which is 100% false.
Yeah,
so
100% false.
Under-medicated, if at all.
I'd like to interject some race history of the United States there, because for those of you that are listening, you're like, wait, I thought we were talking about Roe v. Wade. Why are we talking about race? The amount of things that are intersecting here that have to do... So, prejudice does not come from hate. Prejudice comes from rhetoric that usually comes to justify the status quo. Most of the time, the people that have been making decisions in history have been cishet white men. These people have been in the room, and whether they're good or evil is fucking irrelevant. They were in the room and they were making decisions, and they were making decisions while their Black slaves were at home and their wives were at home in labor. Okay, so they were not the only people in the room were people like them, with no scientific knowledge, no socioeconomic knowledge beyond what has made them capable of succeeding and being in charge. Those people made decisions that turned into laws. Those laws did not include in their minds the people that were working in the fields and the people that were in labor at home. That's how this shit happened. It doesn't matter if it was out of evil or good or ignorance or whatever, it happened. And then later, when that prejudice gets challenged, they get to decide, do we keep the status quo that we benefit from, or do we generate rhetoric to justify it? Which one do we move in the direction of? Do we stay with the status quo, which we benefit from directly, and create rhetoric, or do we go in a different direction where we lose and admit we're wrong and have the questioning of our authority, and help these other people that frankly don't have power to begin with because of the way our society is run? 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, the way society has gone is the generation of rhetoric, usually through the form of fear-based or ignorance-based stereotypes of other people groups, whether they be gender-based, sex-based, race-based, class-based, for the purpose of keeping things the same. And that rhetoric eventually leads to hate. If you're wondering where I'm getting this isn't just my idea as someone that looks like me. Read Stamped from the Beginning by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, The Comprehensive History of Racial Ideas in America. It's a fantastic book. It's free on Spotify right now. You can listen to it on your drive to work. In that book, he talks about how Thomas Jefferson wrote some wild-ass thing about, I'll pull up the title second. Notes of the State of Virginia. Thomas Jefferson wrote this thing, okay? And he talked about how successful Negro slaves were. He used that language often to distinguish them from white slaves in the language in that. So if you're surprised, don't be surprised. That's how they were speaking at the time. And that along with Samuel Cartwright's work, along with Dr. Hamilton, I forget his first name, is where the experiments started generating from the justification of Thomas Jefferson's rhetoric that black people didn't feel as much pain. Dr. Hamilton is the one that did all the, I don't remember his first name if either of you, Dr. Hamilton is the one that started these horrendous experiments to show that black people did not feel as much pain in labor, that black people did not feel as much pain in general, and he wildly failed, but for some reason, he just justified all the pain and all the anguish and all the screaming as showmanship of these expressive black people, as opposed to a legitimate pain of a fellow human being. That non-scientific source from the rhetoric of a prejudiced president of the United States is one of the birthplaces of why medical textbooks still think that women of color, that people of color with uteruses, do not need as much sedation. That's where the shit comes from. It has absolutely fuck all to do with what is real or true or should be believed. It has to do with people wanting to remain comfortable and generating wackadoo bullshit for the sake of keeping things the same, because it'd be harder for them to admit that they were wrong than it was to keep people safe and alive.
And I'll add to that. One of my very close friends is a black woman. She was pregnant at the same time my spouse was, my current spouse. Our children are born 7 days apart. My spouse is trans, non-binary. My friend is black. My friend's labor was so hard and no one listened to her. She's had to have surgeries to repair the damage that happened giving birth to her child, because every time she tried to advocate for herself, she was told she was overreacting. My spouse is a trans, non-binary person, and when you look at them, it's obvious that they are something other than just AFAB. I had to advocate for them in the hospital while they were giving birth to our daughter, because every time they said something was wrong, they were like, well, you're a first-time mother, and you just don't know what's going on. I'm like, but I do. Like, not only have I had 6 children, I've been present for the birth of my other 6 children, and this is not right. So you're going to go run and get somebody, or I'm going to go out there and drag somebody in by their ear. But what we're not going to do is dismiss someone who is in active labor. My wife was in, I don't know if you're familiar, but the stages of labor, she was in what is called transition. That is the stage of labor where the cervix is completely ready and you're about to enter the pushing phase. And no one could see that except me, because she was shaking, which happens when we're in, our bodies start to kind of involuntarily shake. And I had to run and get somebody. And they were like, well, how long has she been like this? I'm like, I've been calling for someone for 20 minutes. They had to move her to an operating theater because they didn't know if she was going to need an emergency C-section, all because they didn't want to pay attention because the way she looked. And then, like I said, my friend has had multiple surgeries to repair damage from having her child, all based on the fact that she's a black woman and she was overreacting during what is one of the most dangerous things someone with a uterus will ever go through in their entire life. We still have a mortality rate in this country for birth higher than almost every other country on this planet. We still are beholden to people who have no uteruses telling those of us who do what we're supposed to fucking do with it. And pardon my Hebrew.
You're good. No, and then, that's the thing. So after 100 years of this precedent, if you want to call it that, being set, and all these very real experiences that women go through, it's no wonder why people with uteruses are terrified of pregnancy in a lot of cases and are not willing to put their body through that kind of torture. And it should be left up to somebody who doesn't want to go through that experience, who for them a child is not worth the
absolutely
terrifying maybe death.
Absolutely.
And it should be left to everyone's decision. And here we are, again, having men rip away that decision.
One of my children is half Korean, and they have said multiple times they are not going to ever have children. And it isn't because they don't love children, but part of it is the fact that they know how they would be treated during pregnancy. My oldest daughter that I gave birth to is almost 30 and is terrified because she's seen how I was treated having her siblings, and she's terrified of pregnancy because of it. And I understand that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys noticed, but part of the leaked documents for the Roe versus Wade was the issue is people are not having enough babies in the United States to keep us at this population they want us. So they need us to be keeping up with a certain amount of population that the government thinks we should be hitting. And there is a decline in people who are having children. So they think this is the best way to approach it. Well, if we just make them have babies, which means they are not pro-life, they are pro-birth. Because pro-life means that we have education programs. It means that we have Head Start programs. It means we stop the school to prison pipeline. That's pro-life. Pro-birth means I want you to have that kid, and then after that, whatever happens to you is your own damn fault.
Can I rant again?
Always.
I've gotten to the point where I don't think any of these motherfuckers are pro-birth. I think they're pro-industry. And it's cheaper to make a baby than build a robot. Like, if it weren't for the fact that we are generated on a capitalist structure that needs, like, poor bodies to labor until death so that companies can meet their bottom line, if it weren't for that, I don't think they would give a fuck about birth.
It's a workforce. That's all they need.
That's a good point.
Need the military-industrial complex to thrive on the decisions of 18-year-olds to go off to some war that, frankly, has absolutely nothing to do with any kind of values. If it weren't for that, I don't think they would care. The timeline between the drop of men entering the military and all of a sudden equal rights for women to enter the military is a little too close for comfort.
Mm-hmm.
If we did not need fresh bodies to be policed for the purpose of being arrested, for the purpose of being incriminated, which makes it legal in the United States to make them a fucking slave.
I was going to say, let's not pretend like the prison complex isn't modern-day slavery.
That's exactly
because
right.
That's exactly what it is.
If we didn't need slaves for capitalism to work in the first place, that's what prison is. If we did not need, laboring low-class citizens for the sake of industries to keep their bottom line, and if we did not need the capacity for the continued globalization of the United States through young, poor, college debt-ridden 18-year-olds in the military-industrial complex, I don't think any of these motherfuckers would care if we had more people.
I don't think so either. I think you're completely right.
We don't need more people, to be honest. We're already stretched on our resources, but as you mentioned, it's not about resources. It's about capitalism first, and it's about the school to prison pipeline, because who's going to be most affected by this? It's going to be poor women and poor people with uteruses, who already can't afford to have a child in a lot of cases, and they're going to be the ones who are in low education areas, who those children are going to maybe resort to crime later in life. And we're going to keep the prison stocked because they're already going to be the target demographic for who they want to be in their prison camps.
I don't think they're more babies for the sake of the sanctity of life. I think they had an empty prison shelf, and they want to keep their products in line. That's what is fucking happening here. It's just like...
And if I may interject, my father, of blessed memory, used to say, if you want to control people, you keep them poor, you keep them ignorant, and you feed them, you spoon feed them little by little your propaganda, and you'll be able to control somebody. Because education, suddenly they're going to become people who think for themselves. You want to make sure that you control people, you make sure you keep them impoverished and stupid.
Which is why their next steps are birth control. They're coming after contraception because of the 14th Amendment and what this entails. And then they're going to be coming after education next. So...
And overfill, I mean, they're going to come after gay marriage. Let's not pretend that that's not a thing. I have no doubt that they're going to try and target interracial marriage. Let's not pretend like that's not a thing. Like, this is going to be the linchpin for them to go, well, see, we already won this. So now we can put it back, the United States, the way we think it should be according to our white Christeo values.
Mercantilism, the notion that we need to have an economic system that requires the consumption of goods to generate wealth, which we think that's capitalism. Yet capitalism is informed by mercantilism. But if it weren't for mercantilism and classism having a very bastardized baby, we wouldn't have capitalism as we understand it today. The economic argument against homosexuality is so much scarier than the Christian argument. Because the economic argument is if we keep them uneducated, they're less likely to identify as queer. Because statistically, educated people are more likely to identify as queer. They're also less likely to have kids early on in life. So if we keep them poor and uneducated, they're less likely to be queer or identify it as such. They're more likely to enter into haphazard marriages for the sake of companionship within an impoverished space. They're more likely to have kids early because they have no sex education in the first place. They're more likely to operate under a dowry and feudal structure, which is the way the entire economic structure to begin with was generated from. And then they're more likely, regardless of their sexual preferences and desires and interests and the entire being, make more people for the entire fucking system. It's not just Christians that don't want people to be gay. Capitalists need people not to be gay.
Which is interesting because that does kind of come up to the, what's it called, like a feudal system in between. The fact that's not the right word, but gay people have, extra income, expendiary income, which does help capitalism go forward, but they still need workers. So like it's putting themselves against themselves because we help the free market with all of our extra dollars, but at the same time, who's going to fill our little factory line?
Mercantilism, right? Because it's not actually about generation of money within all the products, because if you have slaves, you don't actually need a lot of money made, right? You can have no money made as long as you have enough people in prison. And so here's the ugly piece of it, and we're getting into like me and economics and like me being pissed off with everything in the world, but like I think that our government, who could not give a fuck less about whatever religious structure or relationship or sexual structure, I don't think they give a shit about any of that. If they had the option of gay people that have more money to spend versus sexually repressed gays that will enter into straight marriages and make more babies for the product line, they're gonna pick the latter and not the first, because that generates that one has a more versatile product, right? They could go into the military and die for oil. They could enter into the factory line. They could go to jail for getting a ticket at the wrong time, which makes them a slave. And now a slave is more beneficial than someone that has extra income. That's the fucking structure of the whole damn thing.
Why don't they just run a campaign to collect all gay people's sperm and then like have us get like very cheap surrogates? Like why don't they lower the cost of surrogacy if that's the thing? Why not just do a propaganda campaign? Gays make babies. Gays make babies.
The guys of, because then you wouldn't be a villain anymore. You wouldn't be a villain against if you become the ally all of a sudden, you can't be the villain. There needs to be a boogeyman for the United States to function in a fear tactic structure.
I dare say I think gay people are probably more educated and raise a more educated child than a good majority of straight people. I don't want to sound like, sexist or...
You mean heterophobic?
Like, you don't have to dare. The statistics that suggest the happiness and health of children adopted by gay couples versus I can make a baby by accident in an elevator. Like, that's crazy town that can happen. Like, the amount of work that a gay couple has to go through to take care of a child and prove they're capable of taking care of a child, the data is astronomical that a gay couple is better at raising kids than a straight couple.
I'm going to interject here because if we talk about surrogacy and we talk about like the ability for gay people to uterus havers to try and get like frozen sperm or whatnot, we're almost priced out. I had all of my children the natural way, in terms of like I had a male partner and that's how I conceived. Obviously, by the time my wife and I got together, my wife is what she would say is gold star. So she's never been with man. She had no intention of doing it the natural method, how heteros do it. So we started looking into how we are going to do that because she wanted to carry a child. That was something she'd always wanted to do. And like, how do I tell somebody who always wanted to do this, no, that's your life dream, we're not going to do it. We actually found a website created by two lesbian women who allowed you to find someone who would be a willing donor, sign all the paperwork, and be able to match you so that you weren't paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. We combed. It took us 4 years to find somebody because we had someone set up and then things went awry. My wife also has an autoimmune disorder, so she had to see a geneticist to make sure she could carry. We had a lot of things that went into planning our youngest child. And when we finally met the person, and I'm sorry, I'm going to get a little emotional here. Part of it for me was it can't be an accident. It can't be like, because I love her so much, one day she wakes up and she's pregnant. It doesn't happen like that for us. So having to find somebody who has similar genetics to me so that when I look at our child, I see myself reflected back. Having that knowledge in the back of my head that as much as I'm her I still had to get help just to have her. And we were very lucky to finally find that person. But if it wasn't for this lesbian couple who created this website, we would have never been able to have our daughter, because there's no way we could have been able to afford the outlandish prices that are put upon people who are having problems with conceiving and people who are gay.
Yeah.
And the amount of predators, and I'll be honest, male predators who will try to convince lesbian women that the only way they can get pregnant is if they allow them to have sex with them, is fucking disgusting.
That's a thing.
It's absolutely.
Whoa.
I did not know that.
They will say that you can only do it by natural insemination. And I'm like, that's not true. IUI, which is what we did. So we met with the donor, not at my house. He did his thing.
Yeah.
And then we came home, and because a person with a uterus has a higher chance of getting pregnant if they have an orgasm, because the cervix dips down into the seminal fluid and pulls it into the uterus. We engaged intimately. I inserted, inseminated, and that's how we had our daughter, which is why I tell everybody I'm her daddy, because I'm the one who put her in there. But there were a lot of predators who said, no, the only way this can happen is natural insemination. And I'm like, listen, I am neurotic and I'm a Jew. I researched all of this. That is nonsense.
Right.
IUI is just as effective. In fact, probably more so, because I'm getting it right up against the cervix.
There's been a big swing in heterosexual women as well. I've seen it on TikTok. There's services that will basically ship you a package of cryo-freeze sperm for $1,200 now, and you can just insert it yourself.
For your viewers, I'm happy to provide you the website, because honestly, had that not, it's called the Known Donor Registry. And without that, we would not have been able to have our daughter. I don't think that straight people understand the amount of stress it is, especially for me as the non-carrying parent. I mean, Ellen DeGeneres kind of did a movie a few years ago where she talks about it. It'd be great if one night, we made love and suddenly you're pregnant. And I never understood that until we were going through it, until my wife and I were going through it. And then I was like, she's not wrong. It would be wonderful if one night and then suddenly you're pregnant. And and the same for gay men.
That's the one thing I'm jealous about from straight people, for sure. Because
I
would never make the choice to become a parent. I will never be a parent. I'm pretty apparent with that. Whoever my partner is long term, if I ever have one, has to be on the same page. No children.
You're pretty apparent about not being a parent?
What happened? I'm pretty apparent about not being a parent. But that feels like it's robbing something from me, because I know very much so I would be a good father if it were to ever happen accidentally. If I woke up one day and my partner was pregnant, I would take the best of it. I'd probably have a wonderful, wonderful experience having a child, but I will never choose that for myself. So I'm very jealous about straight people for that one thing.
I am too, in terms of because when I was on the other end of that, and when I was in heteronormative relationships, suddenly I'm pregnant. And it was I was a person, the way that my makeup is, you could look at me and I would get pregnant. Like I said, I was pregnant 9 times. It looks like I'm pregnant again. And that was just how, and I would be using birth control. That's the other thing we have to think of in terms of this Roe versus Wade. I was on different types of birth control and still got pregnant.
People always say, well, why didn't you just take care? Were you responsible? You should have been more responsible. Birth control is not 100,000% effective.
All of my children that I gave birth to happened while on birth control. Either condoms, the pill, or that shot. And I still got pregnant.
This is a serious conversation, but I have a funny story tied to that. My wife's grandmother is one of those kinds of people that will if she hears about a hurricane that could come through a general area that we're near for vacation, she'll call. If she hears that there could be extra sun radiation, she'll call to make sure that we'll put on sunscreen. That's just the type of person she is. One day she saw an article about, hey, if you take antibiotics, birth control may not work. Chose not to say anything. And now we have Maisie.
That's how I have IVs. I was 16 and I was on the pill because I had the ectopic pregnancy. My doctor said you cannot get pregnant for at least a year. I had to be on antibiotics for a jaw infection. Next thing you know, I have a 29-year-old daughter named Ivy. That's exactly
I didn't know
how
that
it
was a
happened.
thing. I've never heard about that interaction.
No,
So,
no one
that's
told
probably
me.
important for people out there to
personal
hear.
way. Okay, so we were a couple who was married. We were both working for a church at the time, right? So above rapport, like everything Republicans love, right? Well, my hair was a little long. I could have worked on that, but beyond that, I was exactly what they were looking for. Got pregnant by accident. We were okay with being pregnant by accident. That's something that I know she couldn't do again because of everything that happened.
I totally get that.
Because of the stories that have been told to our daughter says, I want to have babies, but I don't want to carry babies because she knows what can happen. I don't know if my daughter's gay or if she just wants to not carry babies and wants to have someone who carries babies, and she's like, you have the right parts, and she wants a partner with a uterus. She's 5 in pro-choice and wants a partner with the uterus already. That's her life. And so, like, I'm getting to watch her think about her body in light of future while she doesn't know what's happening on the news.
That's amazing. And I'm going to switch trajectories here because this is something I was talking about today, literally on TikTok. When the stuff with Trump happened and he started yelling, grab her by I have a hard time with that word outside of the context of intimacy, so I'm not going to say that word. I noticed what I called, I'm going to have to say it, the Pussy Hat Brigade came out. These white feminists with those stupid hats with the cat ears.
Pink hats.
And they literally disregarded any sort of intersectionality whatsoever. These were white feminists who were like only fighting for other white feminists. These hats were such a slap in the face for women of color because a personal story for me is my first husband, the one who I was talking about earlier, beat me because when we got married, my vaginal area isn't pink because I'm indigenous. So he thought I was not a virgin because, only loose women have different colored vaginas. And of course, I was 15. So I was just like, that's always how it's looked. Like, that's how it's always looked. So I saw these pink hats. First of all, I was just like, you all realize we don't all look like that. You do also realize that there are women who don't have vaginas. And you realize that there are men who do. You are completely disregarding intersectionality. And when Black women and Black people and people of color begged white women, and I say white women specifically, to help fight for our reproductive rights, they couldn't be fucking bothered. And now I'm seeing these same white women get mad at Black women and indigenous women and other women of color because we're like, we don't want anything to do with you. They're like, well, we fought for, no, you didn't. You fought for you because you have no idea what intersectionality looks like. And I'm seeing it on social media constantly. I'm seeing Black women be told by white women, well, we're in this too. Well, Black women and other women of color have been telling people for decades that unless Roe versus Wade is codified in law, it doesn't mean anything. And let's not pretend like Democrats didn't have a super majority at one point. They could have fucking did it. But anyone with a uterus is not, it's like we're not on their radar. Forget us.
Yeah.
And the fact that a lot of white feminists are TERFs, which for your listeners is a trans-exclusionary reactional radical feminists, people who don't believe that trans women are women. Trans women are women, and anyone who thinks otherwise can piss off, in my opinion. Now here we are. It's 2022, and not only are we in danger, but then those of us who are not Christian, like I'm a Jew, Judaic law states that not only are we allowed to have abortions, but we have to in certain conditions. We are
Would you
ordered
say more
to
about that?
Yeah, let's get into that because I think that's important.
Yeah. So according to Jewish law, a child is not a viable baby until they are crowning. Now, do I agree with that? No, because I think it's more like when they can survive outside the womb. But that's just me.
Hey, y'all, listening, crowning is when the head exits, like, the vaginal canal.
It's coming out of the canal. So the carrying parent's life always takes precedence, according to Jewish law. So if the person who is carrying their life is in danger, you are required to have an abortion. The reason being is the life that is present takes precedence over the life that is not. Because Judaic law says the soul doesn't enter the body until you've exited the womb.
Sure.
On top of which, we believe life taking precedence also means the mental and emotional health. Not every rabbi will translate it this way, but I do. If you do not have the mental or emotional capacity to have a child, then you are going to do more danger to that child if you are forced to have it. So a lot of more progressive rabbis will transmute the law as being like, are you in a mentally and emotionally stable place to be able to have this child? If not, then you are required not to. I've had a lot of people who are like, is it okay if I do this? Of course it is. But the United States wants to think of itself as a Christian nation and doesn't realize that they are trampling all over our First Amendment rights to religious freedom. If every Jew in this country sued saying, hey, the minute you took abortion off the table, you are now infringing on the religious liberty of every Jew in America, that would be unbelievably huge.
Yep.
Unbelievably huge, because
I think that should happen. I don't know if there's a direct line to make that happen, but that's a great start.
I put that on my Facebook account. I think Andrew saw it at one point where I was just like, imagine if all of us got together as Jews and said, we're going to sue the United States government because you're now trampling all over our religious freedom. That doesn't mean that Jews are pro-abortion. What we are is pro-autonomy of our own bodies.
Yeah.
We are and there's even a story in the Talmud that says if the child is killing the mother, the child has to be removed. We cannot sacrifice one life for another. Now, as somebody who's had a child, if I had to choose between my child and me, of course I'm going to choose. For me personally, I would choose my child. But I also don't judge anybody else. And I've been in that position where I had to agonize over, my last son, I was told if I had any more children, it would absolutely kill me. And I had to choose to have my tubes tied and go through to make sure, because like I said, I could get pregnant, somebody looking at me. And I literally said that to my doctor. I'm like, if you go through this procedure and I get pregnant again, so help me. And he's like, no. I'm like, I burn them, put silver in there, whatever you have to do. But obviously I can't do this again. But that is something that gets me, is that we believe, this country wants to believe it's a Christian nation.
The fact that they center that in the narrative, it's insane.
And even our founding fathers didn't set us up as a Christian nation.
Right.
A lot of our founding fathers weren't even Christian. They were humanists. No. Mm-hmm. And there's nowhere in our Constitution that says we are a Christian nation. It's just that in 2022, old white men want to think we are. And don't get me wrong for a second. I believe with every fiber of my being, if this passes, there will still be these senators who are sneaking their mistresses, their daughters, their whatever, across 2 states to make sure that they're having these abortions so that it doesn't come to light that they're cheating on their wives, or that they aren't holy people who are upholding Christian virtue. Like,
anyone who has money who can get a plane ticket and send their daughter off for a couple of weeks to recover outside of the limelight with no press, it's going to be fine for them and does not affect them, and therefore they do not care. Like, don't get it wrong. They're still going to use these services.
Not stop abortion.
Absolutely.
We will still end up with abortions, and we're going to end up with more people dying because we're going to end up in back alleys again with coat hangers. And I'm sorry for the visual.
I already see a lot of TikToks going around with, like, holistic help on how to do it, and I don't want to, like...
The mugwort
stuff. It could kill you if you're not aware of what you're doing and the dose is too strong, if you do it too often.
But imagine being in that position where you don't have a choice and you feel like this is your only option. People are going to turn to these extreme measures that is probably going to kill more people every day.
Women used to be using bleach and using chemical. Like, this is not something that's. It's going to be right back to that.
Back to something you said I thought was really interesting. Like everything you say is interesting, but something particularly interesting tied to the statistics of how abortions tend to happen in poorer urban communities. Usually, it's not the first pregnancy. The first pregnancy, in many cases, tends to be the one where they go, well, maybe it's time for me to have a baby. It is statistically the second pregnancy. It's when someone goes, I have a baby, I am raising a child. There's no way, whether it's the father is not present, whether it's we don't have the income to take care of a second child. I can't imagine being a good parent with 2 children. Like 9 times out of 10, actually, I'm using that phrase colloquially.
Last time I almost died. I can't do that again.
I can't do that again. It's not 9 times out of 10. I actually don't know what the statistic is right now, because one thing I've noticed as well is the data, the statistics, and the meaningful information around abortion in the United States is somehow all of a sudden very difficult to find. That has happened overnight.
Well, I will give you. I noticed, so what I've had to do is, I don't know if you've ever been to Google Scholar.
I have, yeah.
So if you go to Google and that's how I've been finding statistics, is I have to go into Google Scholar and then I have to look through there, because if I'm going to just regular Google, I'm getting nothing.
Smart.
But for anyone who is a viewer or listener, if you go to Google, your Google search engine, and you type in Scholar and hit enter, you're going to be taken to a different search engine called Google Scholar, where it literally will just look up papers, dissertations, medical information, those kinds of statistics. That's what I've had to do for most things that have anything to do with our government, because suddenly...
Speaking of, HIPAA is now up for violation as well, if we want to go through privacy.
Well,
but that just reminded me. But
yeah, I mean...
Just to finish it and then close it, when you said that one of the things that you as a rabbi see as like, if you have the emotional, spiritual viability to care for a child, then, but if you don't, the soul is not present, you do not need to care. Like, that lines up in a fascinating way with what we see in urban communities. Now, the reason it's more in urban communities is rural communities tend to have significantly less sexual education and significantly higher rates of puritanical Christian values present within the middle school and high school setting. But in urban communities, it is significantly less so. That's interesting. Anyways, most of these people that end up having these abortions tend to be second pregnancies or second child viabilities, where they go, I can't do this. And so it's interesting how much that lines up with what you were pronouncing right there as Jewish values, that there's an entire religion that is not front and center in this particularly racist Republican Christian narrative that ties into what tends to happen to people. They go, it's not that I don't want to have kids, it's that I want to be a good parent. I can't have another kid. I can't do it.
Right. So some of the questions I have been asked as a rabbi is someone who will say, hey, if I continue with this pregnancy, I'm going to have to go off my mental health medication. Okay, well, are you able to do that safely? If you are not, then that's something that you need to think about. Or I don't think I'm emotionally prepared to raise a child. I don't think I would be a good parent. I've gone through so much trauma myself. I do not want to inflict that trauma on the next generation. I can tell you that the Jews and the rabbis who have been vocal about this are getting horrendous pushback. Myself on Twitter, a colleague of mine named Michael Harvey, he talked about how it's time to fight for our people, our women, our daughters, our mothers, because we can't allow fascism to dictate what happens to a uterus, especially as Jews. He's now receiving death threats from Christians because he had the audacity to say we have to protect people's right to choose.
Rabbi, I'd like to interject there for a moment. Like, if you, our listeners, are familiar with the various realms of TikTok, you might have heard one person or another say, I'm getting death threats. We don't mean some teenager is saying you'd be better on the ground. What
No.
Chana is talking about right here isn't just someone who wants to know what kind of reaction they're going to get online. Rabbi Chana, would you mind going into a little bit more detail to know what kind of stakes are happening here?
Yes, absolutely. So at this point, Rabbi Harvey is well known on Twitter. He has a book coming out that I've already pre-ordered because he does a lot of interfaith dialogue. He works as a chaplain in a hospital who is now trying to decide if they're going to keep him as a chaplain because he was hacked, now getting emails. And I've seen them. I've seen the emails. I've seen the threats. And they're even threatening his children. There was a YouTube video that I have reported, and a lot of people have reported, where a gentleman used a picture of his children and then said, well, it was the third picture I found. I'm like, which tells me you found pictures of him by himself, but you were trying to elicit a response that was going to get you more people to agree with you. The ADL, which is the Anti-Defamation League, which their sole job is to help with hate speech and to defend Jews, had to get involved. The FBI, where he lives, we're not talking about somebody who's like, you would be better off dead. We're talking about people who are literally telling him that they're going to show up and he's going to end up with a red dot on his forehead. This is not like BS people just talking on the internet. These are people who are trying to destroy his entire life for saying that people with uteruses have the right to choose and we must protect them. And he's terrified. When I've talked to him, I've been in contact with him every day. I'm like, has there been any news? And he's like, the FBI is working on it. The ADL is working on it. All for the unmitigated gall of telling Christians you do not get to do these kinds of things and have us not fight back.
It makes me emotional just because it's so hard for me to understand. Well, death threats in general are hard for me to understand.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so hard for me to understand how, as Americans, as people even, how people will put their own just like dogma or just like whatever their own personal belief is, hold on to that so strongly that they're willing to threaten another's lives just because they believe something different. Something as, I consider it as simple as if you don't want to have an abortion, don't get an abortion. But like that being like, and I'm assuming most of these threats are probably coming from men, people who will never even have pregnancies.
They are.
And yet they are so tied in. They're so twisted by their religion that they're going to go out of their way to want to break one of the 10 commandments.
And
like, it doesn't make sense.
Threaten his children on top of it. These people who are so pro-life have had no problems also threatening his children. And that's not unusual for people who push back. Like, as Jews, Jewish people are not unaccustomed to having our lives threatened. I get threatened on TikTok at least once or twice a week, just on social media in general, probably once a day. But this has just gone like completely, like in a way that I didn't even fathom. And he begged me. He was like, I don't need you to defend me. I don't want you to get involved. And I'm like, I have the blood of survivors in my veins. So do you. And I am not going to let any Christian male make me afraid to stand up for my people. And you are my people. And every person in this country with a uterus is my people. And I'm going to fight like hell to protect every one of them. Sorry, I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
No, thank you for sharing.
What disgraceful lack of care for the sanctity of life. Like, I remember when I thought it was just difference of opinion. But that was before I had an education in economics or power dynamics in our country or racism or sexism and misogyny. Like it required my ignorance in all those areas to think it was a difference in opinion. It's not. Like, you cannot be pro-life. By the way, I hate how good Republicans are at marketing. They're so much better. They're
so good at branding.
Like,
they're so good.
The one trait that you want to pass on from the Republican Party to anything else is their marketing campaigns. They're so damn good. They don't even care if they're telling the truth. If it sounds right. Like, All Lives Matter was better marketing than Black Lives Matter. It won in some spaces for a reason, because it was just so fucking good. Like, pro-life has a nice ring to it. It's turned out more people whenever there's a protest. I don't like that. I'm just admitting that it's true.
It's those damn little feet. They use those damn little
The
feet.
size of the
That's what it
fingernail,
is.
they put it in the movie Juno, and now it's in the social ethos. Like it's now in fucking all of us at this point. It's like, oh, babies like fetuses have fingernails, and now it's important for some reason. You can't really be a
Or the
pro-life
heartbeat.
Republican.
The heartbeat thing.
Oh, yeah, the heartbeat thing. Fantastic marketing.
Which even if it's not heartbeat, it's not even a heartbeat. Like it's a pulse.
It's a pulse. It's
like
your
a pulse
mother's
response.
blood running through the baby. That's all it is. Come on.
It works. It works. It works so well. And the problem is to combat that level of misinformation campaign that is riding on religious dogma among the religious illiterate. That's fascinating. If it weren't for religious illiteracy, I don't know if the religious dogma would work. Economic illiteracy, all these factors played together. You can't really be pro-life and educated without directly not giving a fuck about the sanctity of life.
There it is. That's it.
And here's the hard part. And I wish this wasn't true. Most of these motherfuckers with a Twitter account that have an opinion about this will never matter in this fight. They'll never be able to help or hurt in any meaningful way unless they're willing to go outside of the steps of the law to hurt people. That's the only thing that they could possibly do. They can't help. They can't change the tide. They can just radicalize themselves. That's the furthest they can possibly go with this. At the end of the day, this battle is fought by legislators that most of us don't know the last names of, frankly. And that's why we need community organization. There are two forces. Well, there's two forces of power in the world. So our listeners, my profession is I'm a community organizer. What I do for a living is I get people to come together based on their self-interests to make change in their cities. That's my job, and it works. And I'm okay at it. But my organization is great at it. So we need to be able to tap into the only source of power available, which is people power. The three sources of power are status quo, because it's the social milieu. It's what we assume is the norm. It's a passive form of power. It doesn't actually do anything. It just sits there. Money power, which has the capacity to change the status quo for its own benefit. It can help and hurt. And then the third form of power is people power. Those are the three forms of power. People power can beat money power if there's enough people.
Now, I don't know if you saw.
Let's do it.
I don't know if you saw, but Chuck Schumer announced that come Monday, they are putting it to the floor to codify Roe versus Wade into constitutional law so it cannot be overturned. Now, in order for it to work, they would have to use the time-honored tradition of filibuster. Somebody's going to have to put on the adult diaper and read War and Peace for 17 hours to make this happen.
I think we should remove the filibuster first, but they're not willing to have that conversation because they're terrified of what Republicans would do.
I totally agree with you, Jegaysus. I totally agree with you. Roe versus Wade has been since 1972, and no one until now, and even Biden who said he would codify and make Roe versus Wade law, that was part of what he campaigned on, and here we are now. It's like last minute trying to shoehorn it in and going, okay, we're going to try this. And the only reason they're doing for it is because of the leak. Now, I think whoever leaked it, Hashem bless them, because literally now till June, they can rewrite it. They can change their mind. And now they have knowledge that 70% of Americans are pro-choice. 70% of Americans want to see Roe versus Wade made into law. Yeah. We also have a Supreme Court that are cis men, and the lady who thinks The Handmaid's Tale was a rom-com.
Here's the thing. I wonder, and this is my fear, I'm just putting it out there because I'm just being a terrified person I always am, but I feel like the vote in the Senate and the House is going to be performative. I don't have any faith it's going to pass. But more so, the reason why I think it's not going to pass is because they still want to use this in the 2022 election. And I feel like if the Democrats got it done, even if they convinced a couple people to come over to their side for the vote, which they could, there's women Republicans who are very much pro-choice, I still think they won't because they want to be able to run on, look at what the Republicans did. We need more blue seats, which is true. They do need more blue seats, but I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I think they will let it fail so that they can demonize the other side in November.
Because that's the right move, right? Like if let's just be very cold, emotionless people if we're capable of being it for a second. There is no direct benefit for the Democratic Party to codify this into law. Not really. Because if they don't, if something bad happens, oh my goodness, I can't believe this one person, like whatever the reason, right? They have a platform. Like, we have the thinnest veiled theater we perhaps have ever had in the United States right now, where it's just like, I really hope people, like, the amount of people that voted for Biden, where there's like, I genuinely don't believe he'll do anything, but I don't think he'll burn it to the ground the way Trump would. Like that was the legitimate philosophy for so many people. Like,
that was my philosophy, for sure.
My philosophy too. Like, I voted for Biden. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, it's because, and at the end of the day, I think I was played a little bit, if not a lot. Trump was a good boogeyman. He was a good one.
Yeah.
DeSantis will be a good boogeyman too. He'll just be a worse one because he's charismatic and he knows how to have a full sentence without falling over. Like, DeSantis is the next Trump. Like, that's just calling that. There isn't a tactical benefit beyond human decency. And since when does this country give a fuck about human decency? When does that happen?
All about power. How do we keep the power and how do we stay in our seat? Which is insane to me. I've never been a person to crave power, so like the fact that you could throw people under the bus just to like hold your job is insane. It's insane.
Yeah. And let's not pretend for a second that our government actually cares about its people. You know, it says, you know, a government by the people, for the people, but that's no longer what happens. It's a government for the government and for the capitalism. And the people are just a cog in the machine.
We need a constitutional convention, and we need to throw the whole thing out the window and start again.
The people are the industry.
I am pro burn it down. I am very pro burn it down.
Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unholy Trinity. We used to talk about religion and sex, and now we're here to be a leftist commune.
We are going to radicalize you.
Listen, I will be a part of that all day long. Like, sign me up. I will be the first member of the leftist commune for the Unholy Trinity. You have no idea. It'd be like Rabbi Chana, first member. Like, I don't know if that comes with benefits. I don't care. I'm there. I'm like right in line.
I have room on my property for a mini home. That's the benefit.
Let's start a commune over at Andrew's house. He has plants. We could have a victory garden, and we could like sing at night. It'll be great.
Y'all don't realize we have to end on this high note just for the sake of it. But like, I would love, like, I've wanted to be in a commune for so long. Not like as like a cult leader or anything.
Since a kid,
as a person. Like, I would enjoy that so much. I would have so much fun. Whether it's a commune or whatever the purpose, we need each other in the next steps. We here at this podcast, I commit personally to plug in resources as we go, even if it's a one-off episode or whatever, just resources for people. We know some people.
I have a resource ready right now while we're talking about it, actually. So there's going to be refuge states, right, which are going to be very important, I think, moving forward. California being one of them.
What's a refuge state, for those that don't know?
A refuge state is going to be states like California where not only are our laws going to stay the same in terms of, like, abortion is still going to be accessible. We also offer help to people, and we're in the middle of making laws that are going to be emergency laws to help people from other states. And the laws are going to go as far as to not only provide assistance for people who need abortions in other states that are illegal, to bring them in. We're also going to be making them... There's certain states out there that are going to make it illegal for a resident of that state to have an abortion anywhere because they see that coming. So they're also trying to make laws currently that are going to be protecting people so that they cannot be extradited back to those states, so they cannot be criminally charged in those states. So I think that's very important moving forward, but there's currently already an operation and has been. One example would be the California Statewide Abortion Fund, which is called Access Reproductive Justice. And that group will help women and people with uteruses who need abortions in assistance money, about $300 to $400 each, but they're trying to up that. And what they do is anytime somebody needs to come in from out of state, they provide transportation, and there's an entire group of people who aren't part of the organization but are under that umbrella who will offer housing, who will offer rides to and from the airport, to the doctor's appointments, what have you. So there's this entire support network of people who are willing to volunteer their time in addition to the justice group's money. So again, that's Access Reproductive Justice. If you need help, you can contact them and they'll help you schedule what you need to do. So look for refuge states like that.
We'll have these resources in our show notes. For those of you that are watching,
Yes.
you'll be able to tap on these, click these in, and go from there.
And I would like to point out, I live in California. And I know that our governor is trying to make it our constitutional law, the right to reproductive freedom. But I'd also like to point out that anyone who wants to come and visit the rabbi, check out my synagogue, I'm happy to do so. Happy to take you to any appointments you might need to have while you're here. Also, if you don't live in my state and happen to need breast mints, I'm happy to ship you some breast mints, just in case you're in need of breast mints.
I can ship as well. DM me.
We're talking about more TikTok videos about breast mint access. Many of us have gingivitis is a serious condition that
huge.
You should stock up for it in case you have gingivitis in the future as well.
And so look out for breast mint information in future videos.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of breast mints will stay good for a long time. So if you can stock up on breast mints now, up to 3 years.
Yeah.
So that way you can make sure your breast is always good to go.
And that is exactly what Hashem would want.
Yes.
It amazes me as a Jewish person, because I'm born and raised Jew, to see the way that other faiths deal with this reproductive freedom. Growing up Jewish, we were just like, your body is your right. You have autonomy. And something we talked about the last time I was on in regards to sex and Judaism. A person with a uterus, we have the right to ask for and deny. We have full autonomy over our body. And so that also extends to pregnancy, reproductive health. So growing up in that environment and then seeing the way Christians treat people with uteruses is so the exact opposite, that my brain kind of goes, where did you get that? Like, if you believe Jesus was a Jew,
it's not from the Bible. So there's that.
Where did you get the idea? Because, and I argued with this gentleman on TikTok on a live where he was pro-life, and I was like, okay, so you don't believe in abortion at all? And he's like, no. And I'm like, but what happens when God does it? Because it's in the Torah.
Yeah.
Numbers 15, right? Numbers 5, right? Numbers
5, yes.
5:11 to 31.
Thank you,
Yep.
yes. And he was like, that was an abortion. I'm like, these women were made to drink bitter waters. Their bellies expanded, and their children were aborted. So when God does it, then it's okay. But like, if Hannah does it because Hannah can't have another child, then I'm wrong?
Rabbi Chana, my last paper in seminary was on that passage.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I want to read it if you still have access to it.
I do.
I would also like to read this because, I would love to. This gentleman got so frustrated, and I was like, but that's the truth, though. That's in the Torah.
Hello.
Like, it's in your Old Testament. It's in the Hebrew scriptures. And so you're saying it's okay when God commands an abortion. And somehow it came around to, he decided to, and the host of the live was also a Jew. And this gentleman brought it around to how the one true faith is in Christ, and somehow brought it up to Hitler. And I'm like, you thought to bring up Hitler, who, by the way, let's say not even pretend for a second that Joseph Mengele didn't do experiments on pregnant Jews in camps.
Yeah.
And you thought this was the ideal person to bring into a discussion with two Jews. And he's like, I'm just trying to make my point. And I'm like, if you have to use a homicidal megalomaniac to make your point, maybe your point isn't that strong.
Yeah.
We've hit the point where I think, we're getting to the end of our episode, and I want to initiate a wrap up by saying honestly, if you're listening, it really has nothing to do with your ideologies. It's whether or not your ideologies are beneficial to the status quo of your government. Like if you're like Christianity has made itself so easily beneficial to the ideology of the status quo of this government and its economics. And so it actually, if you're a Christian and you think and you're on the fence, I need you to know from the bottom of my heart, they don't give a fuck about you. Your theology is beneficial enough to take the pieces that benefit the bottom line. That's the conversation. If you're confused,
it's manipulation of beliefs. That's it.
Please don't let your whole self be complicit to marketing campaigns for continued slavery for the prison pipeline, for continued globalization through sending teenagers to die in war, for continued labor, suffering, and really death of the spirit from being a body of labor for a government that needs more profit for some reason. Like, it's not very good at managing money. It's in wild amounts of debt. So don't, like, this fight is your fight because you have a body. You have a body. And that should be enough reason for this to be your fight too, regardless if you're a body that can make another body or not.
And I would just like to tack on, if you are a white woman, the greatest thing you can do is to remember that if you want Black, brown, and other women of color to stand side by side, you have to remember intersectionality as a thing. Black and brown and indigenous and other women of color have been telling you for years, and you ignored us. And you have to include everyone who has a uterus in your feminism. If you are discounting people who are women because they are trans, then you are not a feminist. And if you are not including non-binary and trans men who have uteruses because they don't fit your mold, then you are not a feminist, and you are not fighting for the reproductive freedom of all of us. You're fighting for yourself. And while that's worked for you for a great deal of time, we are not going to win this at all without Black women, without brown women, without other women of color, without trans women, and without non-binary and trans men. That is how it happens.
I have nothing to add. I think that was perfect.
Rabbi Chana, we had a plan for this episode that did not get fulfilled. Can we have you back on and talk about interfaith marriage at a different time?
I will be honest. You could ask me to come on for 5 minutes or 50 minutes. If you call me, I'm going to show up.
We look forward now just to, and on another high note, we talked last week about maybe talking about ancient Near Eastern porn sometime. If we do a panel on that, would you like to be a part of it?
Are you kidding? You said porn. I was there right then.
It doesn't matter. All the porn.
Honestly,
any of the porns.
I did discuss this with my spouse because they are a heathen priest. And they said they are also willing to discuss Norse heathenry, Nordic animism, and how it works now versus the way what she likes to call heathen bros use the faith.
You know, our first episode was on religious literacy. We need to include other religions other than which ones our government likes to benefit from the most. Like that needs, we can't play into that. If we're going to be about religious literacy, let's be about religious literacy. I'm down.
Yeah.
I love it.
He would be happy to. And like I said, like this is probably one of my favorite things to ever do is hang out with you guys. You have no idea.
Aww.
Like,
I love you.
If you could have heroes, you're mine.
If we want to show up and support you, what are your handles? Where can we find you?
So on TikTok, I am Rabbi Chana. My backup account is the Rebel Rabbi because I am the Rebel Rabbi. We need rebel clergy. I'm also on Twitter as Rabbi Chana, the Rebel Rabbi. I do Facebook a little bit. My same thing, the Rebel Rabbi, but I'm not on Facebook as much. Usually that's when I'm posting like Drosh or Devar Torah, which is about the Parsha, the section of the Torah of the week. So my main places are going to be TikTok and Twitter. That's usually where you see me ranting at somebody, and then TikTok is where I talk most of my BS, and I'm on my soapbox most of the time.
Love it.
That's how I met these wonderful people. You have no idea.
That's how we found each other.
If we don't have idols, but you guys are definitely a couple of mine.
That's very sweet. Jegaysus, where can everyone find you? Any changes or anything to note?
No changes. Nope. Just still Jegaysus. Still writing it on TikTok and, doing the whole Twitter thing sometimes now. I've been ranting a lot on Twitter for the past week because of
I've seen that.
said interactions, and so I'm trying to use that as my venting place instead of TikTok. I'm trying to keep TikTok professional while I go off on people on Twitter, but we'll see how that
I
ever
should
works.
try that because I'm not good at that. I'm good at the,
I'm not good at that either. I say it out loud, but it doesn't mean it's true. Yeah, so you can find me at any of those places. I also want to just wrap up as the usual. I kind of should probably start saying this at the beginning of the episode, but make sure if you've made it to the end, it's probably because you like this conversation. So make sure to rate us on Spotify and on Apple. They both have little star buttons you can press. Leave a comment on Apple if you want. I've noticed that we're actually ranking in some places. We are number 5 in the religious community or religious podcast in Trinidad and Tobago. So, hello, our 2% of listeners who come from Trinidad. Drop us a line sometime. If you want to email us, our email is unholytrinity2021. That's spelt the regular way, not like Trini-tea, @gmail.com. It's always great to have on Rabbi Chana, so I'm excited to do a new episode in the future. And yeah, what about you, Andrew? Where do we find you?
It's red_sage1 on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram, and that's about it. I don't know. There's another place that there can be. That's the only 3 that I have. So that's where you can find me. Thank you for all those in Trinidad and Tobago. I didn't realize that you were here, and I'm thrilled to know that we are one of your favorites. So we look forward to talking with you all next time.